What up, homies? I'm David Rivera from Rivera Media, here to show you how I do things so you can do them better. Today we're going to be going over one of my favorite methods to color in a comic book style. Before we do that, make sure to turn the volume up. So here you can see the drawing I did of this couple. You know, they're just vegetarians about to enjoy a delicious meal. They are preparing a salad before their main course, and you know, as most couples do, they're just having a nice quiet night at home. I prepared the line work as I did in my other video about the zombie eating pizza. So if you want more detail about how I got the line work ready for coloring, go ahead and check that one out. But this one's about my coloring process. And a little backstory while I'm coloring the flats for this. So whenever I was in, I believe, first grade, we had this assignment to write a book, and I couldn't think of what to write about. So a lot of my classmates made stories about Transformers or Barbies or whatever was popular at the time, RoboCop, I think, maybe, I don't know what kids were into, but that was, you know, Southside School. Anyways, I couldn't think of what to come up with, so I was imagining what a dinosaur would be like, a T-Rex would be like if he wasn't portrayed as mean all the time. And I came up with the idea of the dinosaur who couldn't kill, which was the title of the story. My mom still has it, actually. It's quite some time ago, but it's a classic. It's probably a bestseller somewhere. But the premise of it, of course, is this dinosaur. He's a T-Rex. They're known for killing. You know, him and his friends were hanging out, and he decided he didn't want to go out on this hunting expedition, I guess, with them. So he leaves and he goes off and does his own thing. And so he encounters a few other dinosaurs who are like, hey, you want to go kill something? And he's like, no. And he encounters different types of dinosaurs who all want to do the same thing. They want to go eat meat. They want to go kill. And he's not about that. So basically they bullied him. And as we all know, bullying is whack. So, you know, don't do it. Eventually, he comes upon this girl dinosaur, which is indicated by, you know, the bow on her head and her lipstick, because I was a child and Miss Pac-Man was kind of popular at the time. So that was how you differentiated women in comics and cartoons and stuff. A bow, some lipstick, and some long eyelashes, and boom, you have a woman. So anyways, he encounters this female T-Rex and he asks her to hang out, I guess, and she's like, sure. He's like, I don't kill, and she's like, me either. She apparently has the same problem he does. They're both vegetarians, and well, it's not a problem, but I'm a vegetarian myself, so, you know, things evolve. We all evolve. But anyways, that's the backstory. They live happily ever after as a couple, and I decided to revisit them many years later. They're still together, as you can see. The dinosaur who couldn't kill and his female counterpart who also couldn't kill. And now in my adult years, I know they're vegetarians and they're still a cute couple, and she still likes bows. So anyways, that is the backstory. So as you can see, I have my flats done here, and then this is where I start to do the shading. So normally I create a layer called shadow and fill that with something like lavender or purple, like a violet color, something along those lines. And then I create a layer called highlights and generally fill that with something brighter like yellow or light yellow or dark yellow or some sort of yellow. I would say not school bus yellow, maybe banana yellow. On clowning, of course, you can choose whatever highlight color you want. It doesn't have to be yellow. Yellow just contrasts more in this scene, and I already knew that I wanted the brighter highlights to be white. Then I do a base color, which I usually use 696969, which is the hex code for gray. In my opinion, it's just fun to put 69 3 times. Then I add a mask to the shadow and highlight layers, just clicking the little mask icon. And then you click the mask and hit Control-I, and that inverts it. Then you select both layers and group them by hitting Control-G. I rename that group Edits. And then I use the flats that I just did as a selection and add a mask to the group. So as you can see now, there's a mask on the group, and inside that are 2 layers. And if I start to draw on those layers or on the mask for the highlights, it doesn't affect anything outside of what is masked by the group. Generally, I choose either hard light or screen for the highlight layer and multiply for the shadow layer. So if you select the mask, and then I have a soft brush here, as you can see, I'm putting in the highlights, and none of them are going outside of the mask that is applied to the group. So you can color freely this way and not have to worry about staying in the lines because the lines are already defined. Just adding a soft highlight, soft yellow highlight, anywhere I think that light might fall on this particular scene, and just anywhere that creates a visual interest. Is not really, scientifically accurate. And as you can see, I keep my base layer on while doing that, so I'm not distracted by the flat colors. This allows you to just choose your highlights and your shadows without distraction. Here I am putting in the shadows now. The reason for actually using a purple or something that isn't black on the shadow layer, a lot of people wonder that, is because if you look at it, black doesn't really occur that often in shadows. It may seem like it, but if you were to take a picture of almost anything and do a color pick of it, it's gonna most likely be some form of gray or some darker shade of whatever the shadow is on. So by doing that as a purple or violet, a lot of times you just get a more natural looking shadow, at least in this kind of context. I mean, it's not really real. Hate to break that to you. I mean, well, these two are real. They're still a couple. Okay, so now that I have the shadows and the highlights done, I go ahead and close my edits layer or my edits group and go back into the flats, and now it's time to add some effects. So for now, just like choose a yellow, make some polka dots on her bow, because it's stylish. I mean, you gotta have style. On the background, I go ahead and create a brighter light that's behind them, because maybe they have a lamp or maybe something's burning in the background. I don't know. The whole room isn't dark, so there's light back there. Then I use the table color for the table as a selection by control clicking on it, create a new layer above it, and then make a gradient so that I can apply that to the bottom here. Don't like that, so we're gonna make that dark, and that just adds a little bit of depth to it. These are our effects layers, just kind of editing the background. So I'm just experimenting here, playing with the background, trying to see if I wanted to darken that a bit more. This method, I don't think I decided to stay with. It usually comes down to me using a gradient for vignettes. Yeah, okay, so I added a overlay to that background layer to give it some depth. Then I'm adjusting the shadows, the opacity of the shadows. That layer set to multiply. Apparently I decided to leave it at 51%, which was decent enough. Here I'm experimenting with changing the color from violet to something more along the red spectrum, or brown actually, because I figured brown is present in the female dinosaur and maybe it would reflect on him a bit, but I decided to go with the darker purple instead of the violet. So I did that by doing a color overlay and just changing the opacity. Of course I didn't like it, so I went back to the way I had it before, which was violet. Then experimenting with blending modes, eventually going back to multiply and changing the opacity back to around what it was before, which was around 51%. Again, messing with the colors, just experimenting, seeing which one produced a more natural result. By changing the color of the layer the shadow is on, I was able to come up with something that felt a bit more natural, and just something I'd like better, I guess. It's really, personal preference. So then on top of the shadow, highlight, and background layers, go a little higher up in the hierarchy and create a layer called extra highlights. That way I know what this layer is actually for in the visual hierarchy of it all. And in fact, I took it out of the group because I don't want it to be limited by the selection of the group. It's its own thing right now. And I usually choose linear dodge as the blending mode for the extra highlights or the higher highlights. These are usually the brighter highlights, like as you can see. I'm trying to put some in the eye. Oh yeah, oftentimes I go above the line art because I don't want the line art opacity to affect the highlights as well. Sometimes the highlights or extra highlights need to be applied above the line work because they are the brightest thing in the image. So that's what I'm doing here. The extra highlight layer above all the other layers, including the lines, set to linear dodge, and then just adding those highlights in. You know, it gives it a little bit more depth, a little bit more believability, I guess, because, you know, your eyes have reflections. Anything shiny will reflect, and a dinosaur tends to be a little bit on the shinier side. I don't know. And I'm not really sure what type of salad the dinosaurs are eating, but it looks pretty good for them. I mean, it has a lot of green, healthy greens. There's probably some Parmesan in there, or some sort of cheese, the onions, tomatoes. I don't really know what I put in there, but it's good for them. It's healthy. They're vegetarians. They're living their best life, you know. They're still together after all these years. So these kind of highlights are used for making the dinosaur look somewhat like reflective, I guess. They're thin highlights. They're white highlights for that particular reason. The brush I'm using is the brush. So the brush I'm using has the taper to it, pressure, thickness applied to it. So the harder I press, the thicker it is, and the lighter I press, the thinner it is. And that allows me to create different shapes. So these lines are meant to make them look like they're reflecting more of the light that's around them, because their skin is somewhat slick. Maybe they're a bit oily like me. I don't know. I freaking have so much oily skin that, guys, blotting papers are your friend. If you have oily skin, blotting papers, or just go to the restroom and wash your face, something. So here I am adding some more highlights to the utensils, which are also shiny, and to the cheese or crouton crumbs or whatever is flying about in there. Of course, this picture makes me hungry, so send me some of your favorite vegetarian recipes, because I would love to try them. Now, there's been some hot online debate about what is the dinosaur drinking, and by that I mean no one's asked, but I'm curious myself. Some people do assume that it's wine, which I guess would go good with their dinner, but I don't really know what they're eating for dinner, so I'm assuming they're just having some like fruit punch or something of that sort. I mean, it's a weird color, but you know, artistic license. Maybe it's palm juice. Palm juice is a superfood. It's good for you. Of course, female dinosaur has glossy lips. Her lipstick is full opacity, so she's real particular about that. And apparently she has green eyes, which has no bearing on anything. Okay, so now that I have the highlights finished, what I'm doing here is I'm cutting some of them out by using the lasso tool. So these are going to be a little bit more harsh, so not really cutting them out, but duplicating them by hitting Control-J. That duplicates the layer. Then you can see I'm adjusting the opacity and changing the blur mode to give it a little bit more softness, because I felt like those lines were a little too harsh. The dinosaurs are not that slick, but those particular lines in general were just a little bit much. So this kind of softens them up a little bit and gives that highlight a little bit more depth, as I keep saying. So these are extra highlights. And then I group them because I don't like having a lot of layers visible, but highlights top means that they're on top of everything else. So now they're in their own group. So at this point, whenever I do a drawing and I like to add a little bit more, I don't know, extra to it, I like to make it look like a camera actually filmed it or something like that. I usually do a black layer on top of everything else, and then go to the filters, filter noise, and add some noise to it. Then I usually set that to screen and then reduce the opacity, and that gives it a kind of a look of film grain. It's not really realistic, but it's, you know, adds a cool texture to the top of it. So there you can see a slight difference, but it's texture. I put it below the highlights because I wanted to see if it would look better that way, like if it was below everything. The highlights were, you know, the strongest thing, but in the end, I think I just left it on top because it looked better when it affected the lines and the highlights. Now here, I changed the color of the line work by adding a fill to the layer that the line work is masked to. So that's why I do my line work that way. You can learn more about that in my other video where I colored a zombie eating pizza, but changing the line work so it's not so harsh to a more natural color or more subtle color, which was in this case kind of a dark red, because red is present in most things that have blood running through them, so it makes sense. So here I'm adding another shadow layer. I decided that the shadows that were visible weren't dark enough, because shadows tend to be darker where there's contact points. So like where his leg is meeting the table, where his tail meets his body, and where the glass meets the table as well. Usually wherever the point of contact is going to have a little bit darker of a shadow. Plus, just making something look a little bit more three-dimensional by adding extra shadows and extra highlights can usually be a good thing. That's what I'm doing here, just adding a little more shadow to the whole scene. A little tip about drawing any animal, whether it's dinosaur, cat, dog, human, any creature tends to have similar physiology. So if you're drawing a creature that has 4 arms like this T-Rex, if you don't know their physiology, you can usually fake it by doing something similar to human, in the sense you can see how my dinosaur here has shoulders, 4 arms, and looks like strong triceps too. They're small for his body, but they function just the same. So it's the secret of the pros. Of course, use the info sparingly. I mean, not every animal is similar in muscle structure. I don't want to see a bunch of horses with giant biceps or birds with giant calves. Actually, maybe I do. The more I think about it, as a first grader writing a book called The Dinosaur Who Couldn't Kill, I don't know if that was a cry for help or not. I think maybe it was an outward reflection of some inner torment that I was probably experiencing at the time. But my school days were not so good. But out of most pain comes good art. So The Dinosaur Who Couldn't Kill by David Rivera. Pick it up at your local bookstore. So every time I finish a drawing, I tend to group all the layers separate of the original so I can see the progress. As you can see, I turned it off and on. Then I hit Control Z to undo the grouping. And you can see here, I'm just right clicking on my layers and changing the color of the layer itself. Not the color visualized on the screen, but the color of the layer indicators, so that they are all separate. But yeah, that's it. It's an organizational thing, so that's how I generally color a lot of my artwork. Similar method every time, so it's just a preference, but now you know how I do it. You can do it better, and I would love to see you do so. That's not a challenge, it's just I'm really psyched about seeing your art. So go ahead and contact me on the socials. I'm Rivera Media on all platforms, and I look forward to hearing from you. And make sure to, of course, don't be a stranger, just be strange. I'll see you in the next one, homies. Peace.